now.
Is being recorded.
Hello, Kevin McAleer. We're back for our literary chat, our weekly 1-hour chat on literature. Last week, we focused on Jack London, particularly his novels, not all of them, but the most prominent and well-known. About 7 or 8 of them we discussed, and we found out during that talk that there's so much to talk about him. You said you could have 20-hour-long sessions to get into Jack London, but you were saying that facetiously, of course, but I propose we at least do one more session, and this time focus on his short stories. And I was thinking this week, as I was reading some of the short stories, I don't know if it's going to fill a whole hour to discuss some of the key short stories, but we could just use the rest of the time to discuss any other aspects of London that might be important. And also, we can compare his collected short stories to the collected short stories of other authors. We already spoke briefly about Hemingway's short stories 2 weeks ago. There's the short stories of Rudyard Kipling, Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville. There's so many other collected short stories that we may want to compare and contrast the short stories of Jack London with. So I think that might help fill our hour. To start off, though, I'd like to get your opinion of Jack London as a short story writer, and where does he rank among the great American short story writers, in your opinion?
He's top of the list. He has mastered the form. And what I mean by that is he takes you into a world immediately. You can't mess around with a short story. You have to get us into it. And by the way, out of it very cleanly. You got to tie up your loose ends, or not, if that's your preferred short story, but it has to be a satisfying ending. It has to sit. So you have to get us in there immediately. You can't be like Dickens and describe, a street in London for 5 pages. You got to, boom, you are there. And they do have beginnings, middles, and ends, but you only have about 6, 7, 8 pages to do that. Again, London was writing at a time when short stories were in great demand, turn of the century. That's when paper and printing had become quite cheap at that point. And there was a great demand on the part of the public for his kind of story. Punchy, adventure, manly man stuff. There are reasons for that, but we don't have to get into them now. And he just, he learned his craft by actually, you mentioned Kipling. He learned his craft of the short story by reading Kipling. Kipling was one of his great influences. And I don't know if one can see that necessarily in his stories, but there's a certain kind of Kipling cadence to his stuff. If you have read enough Kipling. I probably haven't, but I mean, it just seems sort of Kipling-esque. I mean, the exotic locales, life or death situations, bearing the white man's burden in a way, right?
Colonialism.
London had that with him in his thing too, the Anglo-Saxon race. We can get into that later, being the all-conquering race. Remember, this is at the time of the height of the British Empire, right? He and Kipling were influenced by the world they inhabited. We can get more into that later, perhaps. But the short story is his baby, as we discussed earlier. He grips you from the moment that you read the first line in his good ones, and he doesn't let loose until the final line.
Yeah, you mentioned the influence of Kipling, and I have read that in a couple intros to short stories by certain other authors, that he did have that influence. And it's interesting because I detected the influence before I heard any other critics mention it when I was reading this book, The Stories of Hawaii.
That's good. You can fill me in on those, because I really haven't read them, or I read them so many years back I forget them all. I concentrate on the Klondike stuff this time.
Right. Well, Klondike stuff is his main stuff, obviously, and it's what made his name famous and great. And Stories of Hawaii came later on in his career. In fact, the last story he ever wrote was called The Water Baby, a story of Hawaii. And the critics seem to say that these are not quite on the level of the Klondike stories, but they're a nice alternative to the Klondike stories. We don't always need this intense existential live or die kind of situation that we often find in the Klondike stories. And it is much more, as it denotes Stories of Hawaii, it's a much more relaxed, casual kind of setting. And it's not necessarily life and death settings all the time, hardly at all in the Stories of Hawaii. They're much more relaxed, they're much more leisurely, and kind of from the town gossip, what they're saying about this couple or that couple or this colonial figure or that it's very Kipling-esque. So in these stories, I did detect a lot of Kipling. Now, in the Klondike stories, oh, by the way, you having written a novel on surfing, you would be interested in a couple of these stories. Have you read this story called A Royal Sport, Surfing at Waikiki?
It's not a story, it's a reportage. He's telling how he tried surfing for the first time and what happened to him.
And I wondered if you were influenced, if you had got influenced by that when you wrote some of the how-to. No.
It's a whole nother world, the surfing that I experienced in the 70s and early 80s and what he was experiencing.
Okay.
No, but it was just nice to know that a fellow Californian had been surfing that early on. And, of course, our grandfather was in Hawaii surfing in the 20s. So that was also a connection.
I wonder if our grandfather ever met Jack London. He was a little after London's time, huh?
You never know. He was up at Stanford for a couple years, and apparently playing ragtime piano in an Oakland bordello. That could be a family myth. But he was up in the Bay Area when London was up there at his beauty ranch.
Wow.
London went into town oftentimes. He had to get away from the peace and serenity. He couldn't handle it after a couple of months. Had to tie one on, the drinker he was, or just socialize a little bit in the downtown San Francisco or Oakland, get back to his old haunts. You never know.
He might have heard him play some ragtime.
Comes down to the family mythology, so I doubt it. Half the stuff that comes out of the family mythology is probably apocryphal. So if we don't have one single Jack London story, I think probably not.
Okay. But it is an interesting career he had. Speaking of London again, especially you mentioned the Klondike is the main place where he made his name, and then we have him in Hawaii. But it says here 2 volumes of short stories that should be more widely known were written about the future 50th state and dramatize his aloha for the people he met on his travels. Aloha meaning love, literally means love. Jack and Charmaine reveled in the beach life of Waikiki, rode around Oahu, descended into Haleakala on the island of Maui, and stayed at the celebrated Parker Ranch on the Big Island. A visit to the isolation colony on Molokai elicited several tales in a collection which, presented here with a perceptive introduction, reveal that, quote, London was still at the peak of his powers when he wrote them.
Oh, yeah. In fact, some of his Klondike stories were written, some of his most famous Klondike stories were written later in his career, because he established his grub stake with his Klondike stories with a series of short story collections very early on, 1900, 1901, 1902, somewhere around there. And as you noted, the reader just doesn't want to read Klondike stories of London the whole time. You want to diversify. Well, he did too. He felt typecast after a while, that he dug himself a mother lode through these stories, but he'd also dug himself a hole that he had to get out of. But oftentimes, one feels typecasted early on in their career, but then they will come back to it later on after they've established themselves in other areas, because, yeah, it was it meant something to them, and he knew a lot about that part of the world, and he kept coming back to it time and again. In fact, the story To Build a Fire, which is perhaps his most famous short story, the final version of that was in 1908. So he had written a version of it in 1902, and then he came back to the story itself, not only to the Klondike, and he rewrote it. And this is the version we have today, which is the great version. And I even want to read a little bit out of that. Maybe this is a time to do that.
Yeah, why don't you start us off with some To Build a Fire?
This is his most famous short story, and it's about a man who's traveling through the Klondike in the middle of winter. Now, of course, for those of you who don't know the Klondike, there was a big gold rush starting in 1896. London followed the prospectors, all the people who wanted to go up there and find some gold. He came along in 1897. He collected all kinds of stories. He's, from the various miners up there, and he came up with his own fictionalized versions of what he heard, and dreamed up some stuff himself. Anyway, this is his most famous story of the Klondike, and this is a prospector, presumably, who's walking through the Klondike in the depths of winter, and he's all alone, and he has only one companion, which is his dog. Okay. Why he's walking with a dog, I don't know. Why he doesn't have a team of dogs, we don't know. But anyway, he's out there and he's trying to survive. And he's not trying to survive because he's hungry, because this is like a day trip. But it's so cold that he's starting to get frostbite. At a certain point, he breaks through the ice of a stream and he wets his feet. Now, if you can't build a fire, title of the story, to defrost your feet, because immediately it's like 50 degrees below zero, immediately your feet freeze and you get frostbite, and we're going to lose at least some toes, maybe both feet. And how are you going to get out of there anyway? So you're going to die. You got to build a fire. And he's got some matches, okay? And he's trying to do this. And this is the whole story. He's trying to build a fire. Now, I just want to start reading the first paragraph, just to show you what I talked about, how London grabs you by the throat and he doesn't let go. Here we are. Day had dawned, cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail. He climbed the high earth bank where a little-traveled trail led east through the pine forest. It was a high bank, and he paused to breathe at the top. He excused the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. There was no sun or promise of sun, although there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day. However, there seemed to be an indescribable darkness over the face of things. That was because the sun was absent from the sky. This fact did not worry the man. He was not alarmed by the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun. The man looked along the way he had come. The Yukon lay a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white, north and south. As far as his eye could see, it was unbroken white. Okay, right? Here we are. And I talked earlier about how one thing I didn't like about Hemingway were his endless descriptions of landscape. Well, because in Hemingway, for me, they're not integral to the drama. It's just sort of like leisurely descriptions, like looking out a train window. I don't really care about that. This is integral to the drama. It's completely white. There's no sun. We're freezing, okay? And London knows when to stop. He knows when to stop the description of the landscape, and he gets on with the action.
I believe it's 75 degrees below zero is how cold it is.
I will jump ahead, if you'll just bear with me. This is such an archetypal story, such an emblematic story for what London does and does so well. I'm just going to
good. We'll let you
run with it for a bit. As he turned to go, he forced some water from his mouth as an experiment. There was a sudden noise that surprised him. He tried it again. And again, in the air, before they could fall to the snow, the drops of water became ice that broke with a noise. He knew that at 50 below zero, water from the mouth made a noise when it hit the snow. But this had done that in the air. Undoubtedly, it was colder than 50 below. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below zero. It was colder than 60 below, then 70 below. It was 75 below zero. Because the freezing point is 32 above zero, it meant that there were 107 degrees of frost. Now, if that's not setting the situation, I don't know what is.
Kev, you know what? Let me tell you this. I was reading that, and I said, and I was reading a couple of his other tales of the North, and I thought he must have had a strong influence from Edgar Allan Poe to write that way. And let me give you a couple analogies. I believe that to build a fire is very similar to the cask of Amontillado. In a person, you see things slowly closing in on them, and that they seem destined to die here, and it's going to be a long, slow procedure. So I feel that's kind of a pit of the pendulum or cask of Amontillado type story to build a fire. And I would be surprised if London was not influenced by Poe in that. Go ahead.
I'm certain he was. I haven't read it explicitly, but I'm certain he was. In fact, I know he was because he one time took a trip to Baltimore and he visited the statue that had been erected by the city's fathers to Edgar.
Okay.
And that was just before he took a trip around the Horn back to California on a ship called the Dorigo.
Okay. Yeah,
the walls are closing in. That's right. Where our demise is inevitable, although there's still a glimmer of hope with London. Okay, and in fact, the fellow in the pit and the pendulum, he does survive actually. Okay,
but then it's better to say cask of Amontillado would be a parallel.
Right.
Yeah.
And here is where the wall is now being built up with mortar and brick
gradually.
Now out in this great white vastness.
Yes.
So now he has broken through he has broken through the river. He has wet his feet. He must make a fire. The problem is he can't do it in mittens. You have to take your mittens off. As soon as you take your mittens off, your fingers go numb. He has to strike a match. He has to also gather enough dry substance, dry moss, and then small twigs, and then larger wood, so it will become a fire. This is no easy task. Anyway, I will read, if you'll just bear with me, this will take about a minute, but then I will stop the reading to build a fire, but just to give you a sense of the prose.
Okay.
So he got it going. He gets the fire going. He's warming his feet at the fire. The fire was beginning to burn with strength. He was feeding it with sticks the size of his finger. In another minute, he would be able to feed it with larger branches. Then he could remove his wet moccasins and socks. While they dried, he could keep his naked feet warm by the fire, rubbing them first with snow. The fire was a success. He was safe. He remembered the advice of the old man on Sulphur Creek and smiled. The man had been very serious when he said that no man should travel alone in that country after 50 below zero. Well, here he was. He had had the accident. He was alone, and he had saved himself. Those old men were rather womanish, he thought. All a man must do was to keep his head, and he was all right. Any man who was a man could travel alone. But it was surprising the rapidity with which his face and nose were freezing. And he had not thought his fingers could lose their feeling in so short a time. Without feeling they were, because he found it very difficult to make them move together to grasp a stick. They seemed far from his body and from him. When he touched a stick, he had to look to see whether or not he was holding it. All of which mattered little. There was the fire, promising life with every dancing flame. he started to untie his moccasins. They were coated with ice. The thick socks were like iron, almost to the knees. The moccasin strings were like ropes of steel. For a moment, he pulled them with his unfeeling fingers. Then, realizing the foolishness of it, he grasped his knife. But before he could cut the strings, it happened. It was his own fault, or instead his mistake. He should not have built the fire under the pine tree. He should have built it in an open space. But it had been easier to pull the sticks from the bushes and drop them directly on the fire. Now the tree under which he had done this carried a weight of snow on its branches. No wind had been blowing for weeks, and each branch was heavy with snow. Each time he pulled a stick, he shook the tree slightly. There had been just enough movement to cause the awful thing to happen. High up in the tree, one branch dropped its load of snow. This fell on the branches beneath. This process continued, spreading through the whole tree. The snow fell without warning upon the man and the fire, and the fire was dead. Where it had burned was a pile of fresh snow. The man was shocked. It was like hearing his own judgment of death. For a moment he sat and stared at the spot where the fire had been. Then he grew very calm. Perhaps the old man on Sulphur Creek was right. If he had a companion on the trail, he would be in no danger now. The companion could have built the fire. Now he must build the fire again, and this second time he must not fail. Even if he succeeded, he would be likely to lose some toes. His feet must be badly frozen by now, and there would be some time before the second fire was ready. Okay, now that's a long passage, but I think we get a good sense of how this London kid writes, okay? Not yet 30 when he wrote the first draft of this.
Okay, so yeah, instead of building a wall around Fortunato, you're building a fire to save yourself. But they both have death closing in gradually on the main character. And I'd like to know, here's what I'd like to do. What other story? I have a list of all his short stories here and the name of the collection. And I kind of want to just go through them one by one and put a name out there and see if it resonates with you and if you'd like to discuss it. I'm going to bring in a couple more Edgar Allan Poe parallels on my end here as we go along. So the first short story collection is called The Son of the Wolf. And
right, let me just say this right now.
Yeah.
In reviewing, I read about 24 of his stories this past week and getting up to speed for this talk. And I concentrated on this first anthology of his stories because I wanted to see what the reading public, what their first exposure to this London kid was. Good. Right?
Good.
How that would hit you, you know, having been exposed to William Dean Howells and I don't know what all these other authors,
Henry James,
and all these other, and all of a sudden this London guy comes along. I wanted to see how that hit me. Okay, we can leave that aside, but I did read all those, and then I went on to read as many of the other anthologies that came along afterwards. But I'm with you on this, so go.
Okay, good. So, and the irony is that he's going to go against all these London Victorian authors with his own style, and his name happens to be London. So this would really be an ironic kind of thing that people were encountering with these stories right at the turn of the century. Let me read the list. The Son of the Wolf. First story is called The White Silence.
Yes, and in fact, I prepared something for this. I actually want to read something from The White Silence, if you don't mind. I won't be reading the whole time. I just want to get this out of the way. Why are we so excited about this guy? If you don't, share our excitement about him after we've read these passages, then fine. But this is why.
No. But I'm glad you. Kev, I'm glad you're choosing actual passages to read instead of just having us talk about it. You need.
Here it is. This is something he wrote. He wrote this story originally. I think it was published in the Overland Monthly, if I'm not mistaken, in 1899, early 1899. He was born in 1876, January. He had written this story at the age of 22. He had been only back from the Klondike for some 6 months or so when he'd written it.
Okay, and by the way, Kev, I don't want you to read too quickly because if we need to have a second session on the short stories, we will. So just go at your own pace.
Yeah, so much for your not having enough to say within the space of an hour. Okay.
There we go.
So this is in the short story, and this is his talking about the white silence, the title of the piece.
Okay.
It'll be short.
No problems.
22 years old, he's written this. The afternoon wore on, and with the awe born of the white silence, the voiceless travelers bent to their work. Nature has many tricks wherewith she convinces man of his finity. The ceaseless flow of the tides, the fury of the storm, the shock of the earthquake, the long roll of heaven's artillery. But the most tremendous, the most stupefying of all is the passive phase of the white silence.
I felt that one coming.
All moment ceases, the sky clears, the heavens are as brass. The slightest whisper seems sacrilege, and man becomes timid, affrighted at the sound of his own voice. Sole speck of life journeying across the ghostly wastes of a dead world, he trembles at his audacity, realizes that his is a maggot's life, nothing more. Strange thoughts arise unsummoned, and the mystery of all things strives for utterance, and the fear of death, of God, of the universe, comes over him. The hope of the resurrection and the life, the yearning for immortality, the vain striving of the imprisoned essence, it is then, if ever, man walks alone with God. He wrote that at 22. It's like James Joyce writing Dubliners at 24. You know, it's one of these amazing phenomena of literary talent that just boggles the mind.
Okay, sounds great. That's a great start to a short story collection, that right there.
Right, the white silence.
That paragraph or two you read would be the first exposure anyone would have had of London at the time, right? The very first thing they would have ever known of him.
Mass audience. Again, he published a couple stories in magazines, but this had been anthologized now, and this is the mass audience now reading this. The mass audience, of course, it's not a mass audience like today where millions of books are sold, but.
So wait, Kev, when did he publish the collected stories of Son of the Wolf? Is that 1906, 1907?
No, I think that was 1900.
1900, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He published 3 or 4 anthologies of short stories, mainly about the Klondike, if not exclusively, one right after the other, within a couple of years.
Okay, now the second story in the Son of the Wolf collection is the eponymous Son of the Wolf.
Right.
Anything to say about that story?
I have something to say about that story, along with 2 others in that collection.
Okay.
So you mentioned the White Silence, now the Son of the Wolf. There's another story called The Wife of a King, and another story which is very famous, it's often anthologized to this day, called An Odyssey of the North.
Right.
So, and in 4 of the 9 stories in this first collection, what struck me is that Indian women are major characters in the action. Now, when you think of London, you don't think of Indian women. You think of, first off, you think of this, people call him a racist. Again, we can get involved in that discussion some other time, perhaps maybe the second part of this or toward the end. I don't want to, because it's off-putting for me, and it's a little complex. But you don't think of London as treating women of color as major players in a short story, right? Maybe,
listen, Kev, the reputation is that he's supporting white supremacy, and there are passages that might indicate that if you look at them only on a simple surface level.
Of course, yes.
Right, but deeper down, he has a great respect for those of other races, as you are saying.
Yes, I think just to cut to the chase about this whole racism thing, he was like a theoretical racist. Okay, it's like he believed in the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race. He usually used that phrase, not whites versus blacks or anything like that. he didn't even talk about blacks or redskins or anything like that. He never used this terminology. He used, which was used at the time. He was focusing on this Anglo-Saxon race as being the sort of the ethnic evolutionary peak of humanity, right? And not as if it was to the detriment of other races. It wasn't so much racial supremacy. It was just that these.
He in one passage he calls us the lords of creation, meaning this is the race that has created all these things where I'm going to be telling my stories and of modern civilization. But that's not to say others can't share in it and haven't contributed to it. So it's sort
of Kipling-esque in terms of bearing the white man's burden. Okay, it's sort of like that. And I don't want to get involved. That some people think that's racist. Okay, I think I look at it from a historical point of view. It's like everyone's a little bit racist. At least the whites were in America and in Western Europe at the time, or in all of Europe. I don't know. Okay, I don't want to get involved in that discussion. But even if I were to grant that, okay, he was a theoretical racist, I use the term theoretical because when you get into his work, into his short stories, as you indicate, there's extraordinary empathy he has for, in this certain case, the Indians. He calls them Indians, so I will use that term too. He uses other terms too, but he calls them Indians primarily. It's a good one. It's one we're familiar with. And they are heroic figures, these women. They are stoic. They are tough. They are strong. They are loyal. These are the things he cares about. Okay, he's not looking at these people from the academic lens of race, culture, and gender. He doesn't care about those things. He cares about courage, right action, and beauty. Yes, and all of these things. These are his categories. And these four stories: The White Silence, The Son of the Wolf, The Wife of the King, An Odyssey of the North. In each of these, a very strong Indian woman with a lot of female agency, to use the common parlance today. Agency is at the center of the story. And I was surprised to read that. I have to say, I had forgotten that he actually lavished a lot of attention, and on the Indian males too. These come along in later collections. I mean, the classic one is that story called what's it called? The Law of Life, where you show this great bravery and stoic acceptance or resignation in the face of your imminent demise. This old Indian man, the tribe it's in the midst of a famine. It's an extremely cold winter. They have to move on. He is frail, and they can't schlep him along with them, and so they're going to just leave him behind. They make a little fire for him. They say goodbye, and now he has all these thoughts in his final moments with the wolves closing in, and London invests these characters with great nobility, and that's sort of his bottom line for judging a human being.
Okay.
Your nobility in the face of your inevitable demise. How are you going to handle it? And the Indians come off very well in all of this.
And you know what? The white men come out very badly in some cases. Check out this other story.
Oftentimes, yes.
For example, another story from Son of the Wolf is In a Far Country.
Right. And I have a passage from that too. So we're really tracking each other here. Let's see, where is it?
Kevin, before you pull that out, how about this? The third story in the collection. So we have The White Silence and The Son of the Wolf, and then The Men of 40 Mile. Anything to say about that?
Oh, Men of 40 Mile. As in The White Silence, you have the Malamute Kid.
Malamute Kid.
I love the Malamute Kid, and you're not sure at the beginning whether the Malamute Kid is a white man, an Indian, or a half-breed. You're not clear. So you see, it's like
and a half. By the way, half-breed is London's term. You're not using that yourself.
I can use it. I don't care what, because I'm using it in a historical sense. That's what they were called. That's what they were called.
I understand, but I'm just letting you know that this is the way he describes them as well. That's all.
Okay, whatever. I'm a half breed too. I'm half Irish, half Scandinavian, whatever. Okay.
Okay.
So, but yes, you're not sure about it, which speaks to London. It's not like he has to distinguish what he is right off the bat. It takes you a couple, 3 stories because he's a constant character. Not in every story of the 9, but in 6 or 7, or I think. You're not sure who this Malamute kid is. He could be an Indian, because he.
What
you
is
don't
the
know.
Kev, what is the meaning of the word Malamute exactly?
Isn't it a breed of dog, like a husky?
That's what I thought too.
He's great with the dogs and the dog sleds.
Gotcha. So there's no ethnic indication in the name itself, and you just gradually figure it out.
I don't know. I don't know, but I was actually hoping, that he was going to be an Indian, because this would be
me too.
more.
Well, it's kind of like James Fenimore Cooper with his main character. What's the main Indian character's name in the Fenimore Cooper?
You have Chingachgook and Uncas in the Last of the Mohicans.
And Cooper speaks of the Indians in a noble sense, the noble red man. And I feel like that in the character of Malamute Kid and those couple of female Indian characters, he's speaking them as the noble Indian as well. London is.
Yes, but and then of course people will say, well, yes, but that's a trope. The noble savage of Western thinkers
with the white savior.
And we don't need any of that. Well, okay, good. You don't need any of that. Fine, I understand. But he goes much beyond that. I mean, he does really invest himself in their psychology.
I will say though, let me just interrupt you here for a moment. In order to prepare for this talk, I stopped by the Barnes and Noble in Calabasas and the Barnes and Noble in Westlake Village, the local Bookworm over in Camarillo, and the used bookstore at Camarillo Library. And I'll tell you what, these major bookstores, all they carry is Call of the Wild and maybe White Fang. Nothing beyond that. I didn't get any of the short stories from the major bookstores or any of the other novels besides White Fang. I almost have a feeling that they're kind of, eliminating any of these other things that might have what are considered racist tropes, even though you can debunk that.
You're safe with dogs, right? No
That's
humans
correct.
in it.
That's correct.
Oh, there are lots of humans in it.
So the question is, let's stop here briefly, just to examine the following question. Even though London might seem great in many respects to you and I, does he speak to the modern woke generation X and X, Y, and Z?
I think so. Because there, again, even if you're looking for racism, it's hard to find. It's very difficult in the stories. It's almost impossible to find, I would argue. And I'm even giving these people a break because they're going to find something. For example, I could just imagine where London is speaking through the woman Madeline. She's a half breed again. Who is she learns to waltz and to speak and behave like a lady. I don't know if you read that one. It's sort of a London's version of Pygmalion.
That's the wife of a king is one of the stories of Son of the Wolf.
Right. And they would say, well, it's all very patronizing because she's trying to adapt to the mores of the white civilization and everything. And London's appropriating this woman of color's voice. I can just imagine what they'll say, but you can't win with them. It's like London appropriates their voice, and he has no business doing that. He doesn't know how they think or talk. He's not
okay, Kev. So we won't worry.
Well, he just totally ignores them. He just treats them like objects. They're just subject to
Kev.
that so-called burden he's supposed to carry. So I was very pleased to see this because I'd forgotten, because I just thought he just dealt with a bunch of guys mixing it up and trying to find gold up there. So,
but you're finding out his portrayals are very
complex too, particularly for a short story.
And fair and balanced and honorable.
Well,
He sees these people as honorable people in many
They
respects.
all come off very well. And you were talking about how the race, the gender that often does not come off very well is, yes, indeed. Are you listening, feminists? Do you like me now? Do you like Jack London now? White men. They come off
Okay.
very.
So Kev, stop right there. We need to. I want to. How about this session? This session, what I've decided we're going to do, considering how much there's to cover, we're only going to do the first short story collection, The Son of the Wolf. We're going to make sure we get through all those stories today, and do the other short stories next week.
No problem.
Need more time. Okay, so let me tell you the titles I've got so far.
We wanted to go to In a Far Country about how he looks askance at these tenderfeet who are not at all equipped spiritually or otherwise to handle this Klondike place. And I just want to. This might be sort of Poe-esque, Kipling-esque.
Yeah, because the way I see this story is this is his telltale heart story.
It's sort of that way. And let me read the first paragraph.
Because they go mad, just like in Telltale Heart. And it's just as riveting. Yeah, go ahead.
And just let me read the first paragraph. It just takes off like the Telltale Heart too, because you know exactly where you are from the first sentence, and you know that disaster is impending. It will strike. Maybe not this page, maybe not the second page, but the third, fourth, fifth, and it's not going to be pretty. Okay, so here's his first paragraph. He's talking about two white guys. When a man journeys into a far country, he must be prepared to forget many of the things he has learned and to acquire such customs as are inherent with existence in the new land. He must abandon the old ideals and the old gods, and oftentimes he must reverse the very codes by which his conduct has hitherto been shaped. To those who have the protean faculty of adaptability, the novelty of such change may even be a source of pleasure. But to those who happen to be hardened to the ruts in which they were created, the pressure of the altered environment is unbearable, and they chafe in body and in spirit under the new restrictions which they do not understand. This chafing is bound to act and react, producing diverse evils and leading to various misfortunes. It were better for the man who cannot fit himself to the new groove to return to his own country. If he delay too long, he will surely die.
Oh, wow.
I think something bad is going to happen. So, In a Far Country, yes, that's one of my favorite stories because it's like a Greek tragedy. You see the disaster coming from a mile away, and you want to say, "Stop! Don't go! Stop! Don't get a cabin together! Don't take, be careful about taking sugar from the other guy's provisions. This is going to end badly."
Be careful about going out by that grave in the front yard where two people are buried, where ghosts are going to inspire you to great evil. I mean, this is definitely Poe-esque, and this is his telltale heart because you see them falling into madness. What's the opening line of Telltale Heart?
Mad, yes I am, or something like that. Mad, wouldn't you be too? I don't know. I think mad is the first word. Madness, madman, something like that.
Something about madness is right out there with Poe, and this is where these men are going to descend into as well. And it's very Poe-esque, and it's very in its terror and its horror. So I do feel more Poe in there. And a third story that's very Poe-esque is Batard, about this devil dog, which is his version, which is his black cat. The Poe black cat story we have in the story of Batard. Yes. But Batard is not in The Son of the Wolf. So let's make sure.
That was written much later. That was written in an anthology, an anthology, like the fourth anthology on down the line. But if I may, here is I have to jump ahead because this is just I didn't even plan this.
Go ahead.
The discussion is taking this course. Another story along these lines, which is another white guy who is ill prepared for what the white silence has in store for him. This is another one of my favorite stories. This is called The 1,000 Dozen. Are you familiar with this?
I am. I just read it yesterday.
Okay. This is a guy who wants to make a killing on eggs because you don't have the amenities up there, and the Klondike guys have all kinds of gold. They're just dying to buy eggs, I guess. Well, the first time you read this, even just in the title, or you read into the story a couple, 3 sentences, you're thinking, eggs? Aren't they rather fragile?
Don't they go rotten?
Don't they go rotten? I mean, I know if I don't eat my eggs in the refrigerator after a week and they're in the refrigerator, I know it's cold up there in the Klondike, but they go bad. So you're thinking, this is not a good idea just by virtue of the title.
Right.
Okay. But again, this impending disaster that London, as with Poe, sets up so beautifully. Okay.
Yep.
And I would also argue. Well, let me read this first. I'll just read the first sentence, not even the first paragraph. Here we go.
First sentence.
David Rasmussen was a hustler, and, like many a greater man, a man of the one idea. Okay. Now this is beautiful. This is like Bach. This is like Bach. He takes 4 notes and he builds a cathedral of music. This is all you need to know. This is the man of the one idea. This is a guy who gets in the grip of a self-destructive obsession, and it will not let him go. Now, unlike these other characters, like in A Far Country, who were, weaklings, this Rasmussen guy, he's a pretty tough guy, but he's too tough for his own good. He's willing to die in the cause of getting these eggs up to the Klondike and selling them at a great profit, come what may. And I don't know if we want to give the ending away, but it's classic London. Do you want to give the ending away? Maybe not.
We can't give the ending away on that. But you're right. He is the man of the one idea, and that is a motif that goes through that whole story. This man's obsession.
And at the same time as London sets it up for you, like this again is not going to end well. He tantalizes you with the possibility that, well, it maybe might. For example, and even in just the sentences following that first sentence, if I may, let's go just to the first paragraph, to show you how he tantalizes you, thinking, well, it might turn out okay. At the same time, he also drives it home even further that it will not end okay. So I will start again. David Rasmussen was a hustler, and like many a greater man, a man of the one idea. Wherefore, when the clarion call of the North rang on his ear, he conceived an adventure in eggs and bent all his energy to its achievement. He figured briefly and to the point, and the adventure became iridescent hued, splendid. That eggs would sell at Dawson, which is a city out there in the Klondike, that eggs would sell at Dawson for $5 a dozen was a safe working premise. Whence it was incontrovertible that 1,000 dozen would bring, in the gold metropolis, $5,000. On the other hand, expense was to be considered, and he considered it well, for he was a careful man, keenly practical, and with a hard head and a heart that imagination never warmed. At 15 cents a dozen, the initial cost of his 1,000 dozen would be $150, a mere bagatelle in face of the enormous profit. And just suppose, to be wildly extravagant for once, that transportation for himself and eggs would run up $850 more. He would still have 4,000 clear cash and clean when the last egg was disposed of and the last dust had rippled into his sack. Well, this very careful man, this very provident man. Anyway.
Kevin, later on in the story, as things begin to reach their climax, he has this great passage. Let me read it real quick here. It says, it's hard to read with my glasses on. Being a man of the one idea, now that the idea had come, it mastered him. In the foreground of his consciousness was Dawson, the city up north in Alaska. In the background, his 1,000 dozen eggs, and midway between the two, his ego fluttered, striving always to draw them together to a glittering golden point.
Yeah.
This golden point was $5,000, the consummation of the idea and the point of departure for whatever new idea might present itself. For the rest, through a glass darkly, for the rest, he was a mere automaton. He was unaware of other things, seeing them as through a glass darkly and giving them no thought. The work of his hands he did with machine-like wisdom, likewise the work of his head. So the look on his face grew very tense, till even the Indians were afraid of it and marveled at the strange white man who had made them slaves and forced them to toil with such foolishness.
Yeah. He's not a weakling. He's not like these two characters in A Far Country. He's more like the fellow in To Build a Fire. He's by no means a wimp, but he just is. He has the imagination of a newt. I mean, he just cannot think beyond this initial, great idea he had.
Okay, Kev, wonderful little diversion there. We have 10 more minutes, so let me go through the rest of the stories in Son of the Wolf, so we at least finish that compilation today. Okay, so we had The White Silence, The Son of the Wolf, The Men of 40 Mile. Did we already mention what you wanted to about that? The Men of 40 Mile.
That's just Malibu Kid, and he's a tough customer, and he prevents a duel by threatening the guy who survives it with hanging. He has the rope. He says, "Yeah, go ahead, guys. You know, the one who survives, we're going to string him up." They go, "You're not going to do that." Yeah, you think I will? And so it's that kind of that male badinage, and
Okay. And a variation. That's an interesting variation on the dual theme that we often come across in stories that turn this.
Yes, but one thing I do want to say is that London is great with dialogue. He's not the same master of dialogue that Hemingway is, because Hemingway's dialogue is sort of it's so spare that it's almost unrealistic, I should think, but there's a great rhythm to it with the Hemingway. With London, there's less of a rhythm, but there's more of a authenticity, I would imagine. Not that I have been up in the Klondike, and know how people talk, or could go back in a time machine and figure that one out, but it smacks of authenticity. The lingo, the jargon they use, the turns of phrase. He's very good at that.
So The Men of 40 Mile, and then In a Far Country is next. We've already discussed that. The next story after that is To the Man on Trail. Anything to say about To the Man on Trail?
No, that's the Malibu Kid again, and he has a good line in that. What is it? I can't quite find it, but he is something about to the man on the trail. May his dogs never tire. May his food never run low, and may may he break trail as easily as possible. I just muffed that one, but
that's all right.
He's got a good line there where he gives a toast to the man on the trail, whomsoever he might be.
Okay, and then the one after that is called The Priestly Prerogative.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's with a white woman who plays the hero, because her white husband, here we go, we got the theme running throughout this, is a complete ne'er-do-well. She pushes him to success. She pushes him into the great white north. She pushes him to discover gold and have this big mother lode really pay off in a big way. And she's the power behind the throne, and he takes all the credit for it. So here we have another example of a woman who is actually the strong character, and the man who is the weakling here. But in her case, it's a white woman, not an Indian. But look, 5 out of 9 stories, the women are basically the heroes.
In fact, he refers to her as the eternal feminine in this, that she had all the traits of an eternal feminine figure. So he's really elevating the female. Okay, and then you have The Wisdom of the Trail. We have a lot of the trail type. We have the man on the trail.
The Wisdom of the Trail is where we meet Charlie Sitka. And Charlie Sitka is an Indian, okay? Not a half-breed, straight off Indian. And he's a very noble character, again, to use the term, but it applies. He eventually ends up, he's like the trail boss, I suppose is what it would be. He's got a couple whites, 3 whites or so, and he's got a couple Indians under his supervision. And the Indians, they take some flour, and they're running low of provisions, so this is a no-no, and they've been instructed not to, expressly not to take any extra provisions for themselves, but they do it. And they know the price, it's their lives, they must die. And he executes them. And before he executes them, there's a kind of a touching passage. I wish I had it at hand, I could read it as to end us off here, but it's like he speaks to these Indians, his brethren. He says, you know the law, you have broken the law, you now know the penalty. Is it good? And they say, yes, it is good. I find it to be good. Is it good? The second one, yes, it is good. It is good. Again, like the law of life, these Indians, this fatalism, which comes across as a great sort of a great high-heartedness. Then he boom, he kills them. Actually, just before they were going to make Dawson or whatever the city is, 40 Mile, because they hear shots coming out in the other direction to signal that you're close. So right after his shots ring out and his 2 brethren die, then they hear the shots. So again, London, right when they're on the verge of getting there, boom, you're done.
Okay,
that's a good story, and that's where you meet another noble Indian character, Sitka Charlie.
Okay, now 2 more stories. The last 2 stories are The Wife of a King, which you already mentioned in another context. This is where the Indian girl is trying to take on all the mannerisms and identity of a white woman.
Right.
And anything further to say about The Wife of a King?
I think we said it. Again, she's trying to win him back from what she imagines. He's not sure. He goes off to Dawson or whatever city there. They live out in the wilderness. She imagines he's consorting with some white woman, maybe a prostitute. We don't know exactly. And then, the Malamute Kid, again, he takes her in hand. He says, okay, good. We're going to show him. And he gets a couple of his buddies. One guy can play the violin, another guy can dance with her, and they learn the teach her the waltz. There's a woman, a wife of a guy, white woman married to a white guy down the road, and she's got all kinds of dresses and fits her with nice, slippers. And there's a big masquerade they have in the city. They go in there, and she's masqueraded, and they don't know who she is. And she ends up dancing with her husband, and he's quite taken with her. He doesn't know it's his Indian wife, and then it ends happily, sort of.
Okay. And then last one, the last story of Son of the Wolf is An Odyssey of the North. Final thoughts. We talked about it briefly before, but quickly again, what's An Odyssey of the North about?
Odyssey of the North. That gets anthologized a lot. It's a longer short story, and it's basically about an Indian who buys a bride in his tribe. That's how they did it, I guess. You put all your worldly goods that you can afford to purchase this young maiden. And on the eve of his wedding, or was it? No, it was on the day of his wedding. He actually did marry her. This white man, this giant, looks like 7 feet. He's described as 7 foot. He's 300 pounds. It's a massive dude. He comes in and basically he abducts the wife. He likes her. She's pretty, and he says, I'm going to take her. And he goes off with her, and this poor Indian fellow, the groom left at the altar, he swears vengeance, and he's going to go find her and kill this guy. And essentially, after years and tens of thousands of miles across land and sea, he finally finds him. We don't have to get into details, but he then essentially kills him.
Wait, give us all the spoilers.
Now, I'm not going to, but I have to tell you what happens. And
Okay.
I have to tell you what happens because it illustrates, this what this woman is all about.
Okay.
This Indian woman, and then he like reveals identity because they had both been very young at that time. This is like 10 years later, 12 years later. I guess you don't recognize someone. Maybe it's a little bit of artistic license there, but anyway, they don't recognize him, and then he kills the husband essentially, and then he reveals his identity to this woman, and then she curses him out. She spits on him, says, "Are you crazy? I'm not in love with you. I'm in love with him." In other words, she has grown to love this man apparently. And she's loyal to him even in death. And she tries to kill this Indian fellow, doesn't succeed, but she is then left there out in the wilderness, hanging on his dead body. And again, the Indians are basically the players here. The white guy is the evil doer.
Yeah.
Truly.
I think pound for pound, the white men and women are not doing as well as the Native American peoples in these stories.
They're not doing it. They're not doing well at all. And I think this continues more or less through the next story collections.
Okay, Kev.
Yeah.
We do have to wrap it up. So we finished surveying how many stories? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We finished the 9 stories of the Son of the Wolf. And now the next story collection is The God of His Fathers. And we have about 10 or 11 stories there I'd love to go through next time. If you don't know the list of that, I'll send you the list.
No, I got it. I have all 4.
Wonderful.
Anthologies.
So since we went through the first set of short stories, Son of the Wolf, let's do The God of His Fathers next week. And we're just going to go through them one by one. And the deeper we get into these stories, the more we learn about London through these stories and what he was like as a storyteller, as an author, and as a man. All right, Kev, that's it for today. Any final thoughts before we exit?
Yeah, just the agenda next time. Okay, we can do that, fine. Okay, but I think I don't want to bore the listeners with more Klondike stuff. I mean, maybe because it's just all Klondike stuff. There's other stories that we could definitely get into. We could talk about his boxing stories, his Hawaiian stories that you read.
Well, Kev, I think we have time for all of this. I'm not on a timetable.
We're talking 3 or 4 sessions then.
Why not? I mean, but let's you and I discuss that outside of this video. For now, the final thoughts on Son of the Wolf are a great way to introduce himself to the public.
It's a great way to be introduced to London and to disabuse people of many of the cliches they have about him. And what a whale of a debut. Again, this at 24, it's mind-boggling that a man could write like this and have accumulated so much experience to know all of the stuff that he brings to bear in these stories.
You said he wrote one of the stories at age 22. Was it 22 or 24 or?
No, what happened? He published these stories in magazines first of all, and then they were collected. Maybe not all of them were in magazines first of all, but the first story of the collection, The White Silence, that was published in 1899, and he had written it in 1898 when he was 22.
Gotcha. Okay, Kev, we're done for the day. Thanks.
Good.
And see you next week.
All right. See you later. Bye.
Bye-bye now.